Okay, we are ready to start. So if everyone could turn on their cameras. Okay, so I think we are all good to begin. So I'd like to welcome everyone watching to our event, Samasana Presents Contemporary Tensions, a live panel-based discussion regarding the current conceptions of Indian classical dance, featuring Ms. Swati Jaishankar, Patruni Chirananda Sastry, and Dr. Hoshita Kamat. So what is this event? Our live stream discussion will explore themes related to creative innovation, learning, and inspiration while discussing contemporary issues in relation to Indian classical dance. Our goal is to provoke the conversations that matter and to amplify the place of classical Indian dance in raising relevant questions across the world. And who are we? Samasana is a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Cleveland. We were founded to exemplify the value of community, specifically through art. Our central focus is to showcase classical Indian dance, but our larger goal is to amplify the power of art in connecting people to form community as per our organization's name, Samasana. Our aim is to promote general awareness of classical Indian dance through education and providing a competitive platform for collegiate dancers from across the nation to showcase the art to both the Case Western Reserve community and the greater NEO community. We also strive to be consistently recognized nationally as the host of a cultural showcase event, while engaging in philanthropy to support the greater Cleveland community. And speaking of philanthropy, if you want to support our mission, you can donate at our GoFundMe, which is in the Facebook event. Now, beyond that, I'd like to introduce the moderators. So I guess I'll start. My name is Rohan Desai. I'm on the executive board of Samasana.
My name is Sunaina Champana Boyana. I'm also on the executive board of Samasana.
My name is Tanvi Patel, and I'm also on the executive board of Samasana.
Hi, my name is Animesha Krishnamurthy, and I'm also a board member.
Animesha also happens to be the representative from Case Western Reserve University's Indian classical dance team, Nritya. So with that out of the way, let's introduce our panelists. I'm going to do a brief summary of our panelists' bios, and then we'll give them a chance to introduce themselves. So first off, Patruni Chirananda Sastry is a classical dancer, entrepreneur, social activist, and customer service expert who is currently an analyst at Deloitte Hyderabad. Patruni started dancing at the age of 7 and pioneers a unique style called expressionism as a way to tell stories that raise social awareness through dance. He has performed in numerous national and international dance festivals and worked on creative projects including documentaries and innovative storytelling. Our next panelist, Ms. Swati Jaishankar, is a professional Bharatnatyam dancer based in New Jersey, USA. She has won numerous accolades and has given several solo and group performances in the US and abroad, including India and Dubai. She's the creative director for Indian Raga, through which she has choreographed and performed in over 25 major productions over the past 3 years that received millions of views and wide acclaim from the artistic community and broad audiences alike. Dr. Hoshita Kamat is both a classically trained dancer and scholar who earned her BA from Emory University, Master's in Theological Studies from Harvard Divinity School, and a PhD from Emory University. Her research focuses on the textual and performance traditions of the South Indian language of Telugu in conversation with theoretical discourses on gender and sexuality in South Asia. Dr. Kamat's monograph, Impersonations, The Artifice of Brahmin Masculinity in Kuchipudi Dance. Okay. So with that out of the way, I'd like to give our panelists the chance to introduce themselves as well. Dr. Kamat, if you want to go first.
Sure. Thank you all for having me. It's thunderstorming outside, so you might hear the sound of the rain. Just started. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and learn from the fellow panelists about their experiences. I'm trained in the South Indian dance style of Kuchipudi. I also have training in Bharatanatyam as well. And like many of you, I've been dancing for much of my life, but now I get to be the old auntie in the back of the classroom, which is great. I have 2 kids, so it's a joy whenever I get to dance. I teach at Emory University, and I teach classes primarily in religious studies and South Asian studies, but I do try to teach at least once a year, once every 2 years, a course that's about the histories of Indian dance forms. Primarily I focus on Bharatanatyam Kuchipudi, and sometimes Kathak and Kathakali as well. And I've had a practical component in those classes. So I'm very deeply invested in the questions that you're asking for the panelists. I'm really curious and looking forward to engaging in the conversation. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Petruni, if you would like to introduce yourself next.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for joining, with different time zones. So my name is Petruni, and I'm being based when I started learning Bharatnatyam, Kuchipudi, and Odissi. It's not just one, but I tried of learning, whatever came into my way because I was traveling from one place to the other. And my interest with dance actually started in identifying my own sexual orientation as well as gender orientation, and that became a kind of my expression towards communicating how exactly I felt within. And with that, I also developed a kind of a way of communicating stories which are quite relevant and focused majorly onto the LGBTQI plus communities within India, and used alternative forms like performance art, as well as drag, with the format of whatever I've been learning so far, and dive into the intersectionality of all the three art forms and present it to the audience. So yeah, that's pretty much about me.
Thank you. And Swati, if you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Thank you so much again for having me here. Again, I'm very excited to learn from the other two panelists because both of you are very knowledgeable dancers and experienced dancers, and I consider myself still a student, so I still have a lot to learn. So I'm excited to also learn from both of you through this discussion. And a little bit about myself is I've been learning Bharatanatyam for the past 15 years and been able to perform and gotten a chance to be a part of Indian Raga, through which I've been able to experiment with a wide variety of pieces. And aside from dancing, I'm currently a product analyst at Putnam Investments in Boston. So yeah.
Thank you for that. So with that, I think we'll start it off. And we have a very specific question. So Dr. Kamat's work, Professor Kamat, in impersonations, which is the work that she has written, there's in the introduction, it says, in India, the propertied, high caste, heterosexual Hindu male is at the top of religious and caste hierarchies, and this is taken as normal, natural, and beyond reproach. And a question we got that relates to kind of a larger topic that we had started discussing is, should high caste heterosexual Hindu males be the individuals enforcing gender roles? And what exactly is hegemonic Brahmin masculinity? Is kind of just a general question that we had got.
Sure. So I can maybe just back up a little bit and say where I became interested in this project. I am trained in Kuchipudi, and Kuchipudi, I think, has an interesting and specific history in comparison to other dance forms in India because it's grounded in a village. It comes from the Kuchipudi village, which is in the Krishna district of Andhra Pradesh. And initially, when I started the project, I, like Patruni Chidanandas Shastri Garu, I was really interested in this idea of drag and its sort of counterpart in terms of impersonation in India, where I found drag to be quite subversive. In India, I thought impersonation was done by anybody. In fact, it was done not only by anybody, it was done by the white man equivalent of the American context, the Brahmin man in the Indian context. And so I was really interested in how does that then shape broader understandings of gender and sexuality more broadly in India. And so the project started off with ethnographic research in the Kuchipudi village, spending time with their community of Brahmins. And for those of you who are, the book is available for free online. It's open access through University of California Press. So you're welcome to go check out the link and send me an email if you have questions. But I was really interested in sort of thinking about what happens when we have these gender crossings. What does that tell us about gender constructions, about sexuality, about power? And what I found contrary to sort of what I was expecting, which is this kind of gender fluid universe in which anyone can do anything, In fact, I found that the Brahmin men of the Kuchipudi village, who I respect greatly, are amazing artists, you know, fed me like their own, taught me dance, but still were really exclusive in terms of their community. That people from the village who had been raised there and been there for generations were the ones who were really authorized to perform. And so what I was interested in tracing is what happens in the village in the construction of what I call in the book, this kind of normative understanding of Brahmin masculinity. And then how does that really get challenged as soon as we move into urban contexts? And by urban, I mean Hyderabad and Chennai and, you know, close to places that are very, very close. And so what I ultimately argue is that the village really upholds a heteronormative understanding of Brahmin masculinity, and then that really is rendered fragile. So it's a kind of Brahmin fragility, if you want to use that adopting white fragility language, that happens as soon as this dance form moves into transnational spaces. So that was my sort of interest, and there's a lot more I can say in terms of the caste composition of Kuchipudi, and and also I'm sure our panelists probably have things to say about Bharatanatyam as well. But my interest was really focusing on this particular community and the ways in which impersonation, that is this donning of the Strivesham, functioned to enable a construction of masculinity in that village.
Thank you for that sort of overview. If you, Trinigaru or Swati, have kind of anything to add to that in terms of maybe outside of the frame of Kuchipudi, or even in it, or in your personal experience, kind of how structures such as caste, class, interplay with your approach to the art forms.
Yeah, so it was really interesting to know the the work which the other panelist has been doing, which is really incredible to learn and to see it as a curve of learning. I think I come from a different space altogether, where it comes to representing or talking about caste and other situations within the framework of dance. So my major audience, whenever I went, and my first outbreaks of my major audience were actually the people of the queer community within India. And as queer community is quite diverse, and they're outspoken about the multiple caste scenarios at one or the other point in time, and me coming from a privileged upper caste background with the title which I can't which I love to hide, but it's so evident over there. It took me a while in understanding or trying to see the work of art in quite inclusive way, and understanding how exactly it fits in to the dialogue of how can that help, or that how can that create a kind of awareness within the queer community, and also represent without going ahead and to be called as somebody coming from the Shavana culture, or taking spaces of people who are of taking spaces of majorly people of somebody who's from a different part of that particular diaspora. So I think that was a bit of challenge for me. Like I always wanted to ensure that what are the spaces which I can be on, and what are the spaces which I cannot be or I should not be. And that effective understanding of questioning was something which helped me a lot, and ensuring that I'm not in the wrong space, and I'm giving spaces to the others when it comes to talk about caste and the politics of caste within the queer community itself. So yeah, I think that was a bit of challenge. However, as a part of conversations and learning, I did understand that not every space is something which we can claim, and there are spaces which which should be represented by people of a different subgroup, and they should be coming ahead and voicing it out.
Thank you. And Swati, I'm not sure if you'd like to contribute to that or respond in any way with kind of your experience or approach as well.
Sure. So just going off of that, I guess like my experience in working with contemporary issues Like obviously not as in-depth as the two of you, but a small experience that I had in Indian Raga was working on one of my pieces, Revelations, with another dancer named Aarti. And there we did work on bringing out the social topic of a daughter coming out to her mother, which was, you know, a simple story where you're able to see something on the LGBTQ community, something that's not really shown traditionally in Bharatnatyam, but also simple because it just shows the bond between a mother and daughter. So I think that's why that piece is so relatable to people. And yeah, so that's just, I think, one of my takes, and we can talk more about that in depth when we carry on.
So my question, kind of building off of that, is maybe between kind of just the two sort of spaces, do you think, or how do you think being maybe part of more of diaspora and being part of a dance community and maybe being more part of that dance community transnationally versus maybe being primarily based in India, how do you think the spaces that you have access to or the spaces that you should have access to are kind of shaped by those different backgrounds?
Maybe I can jump in and then you all can chime in as well. I would say that, you know, diaspora and transnational dance communities, or maybe dance communities in India, are very much transnational. I mean, dancers come here, you know, maybe pre-COVID, come to the United States all the time to perform, especially during the summer months. And there is this increasing sense of movement across nations, right, in terms of the ways in which dance flows. I think one thing, however, is that I find that within the diaspora, there is a less kind of conscious effort to talk about some of the histories of Indian dance that are complicated. And I think that's where this conversation around caste that might also be helpful to foreground. Many of us within the diaspora sometimes operate in this this context like, oh, we don't see caste, or we're post-caste. But in reality, the very dance forms that we practice are grounded in giving voice to certain caste groups. And it makes us uncomfortable. I mean, I know as a dancer, I'm, you know, just like Patrun Garu said, my last name, right, like already marks me as being Brahmin. So my parents are from the two dominant Brahmin communities in Telugu speaking South India. And for a long time, I just didn't know how to talk about it, right? Which is to say, yes, I come from privilege. What do I do with this? And so for my students now, we talk very explicitly about the ways in which Brahmins, particularly within the histories of Bharatnatyam, and there's such excellent scholarship that has outlined this, really came to rewrite the script for Indian dance from a Devadasi form to a dance form that was controlled, disseminated, produced, choreographed by upper caste and middle class people within Chennai, and then it ultimately expanded to other areas. So I think that acknowledgement, I feel like sometimes gets lost in the diaspora space. And I think that increasingly in India, we're seeing hereditary Devadasi dancers or from Devadasi families actually now coming and performing repertoires from their grandmothers or great grandmothers. And there is a space for that. And increasingly there's a space for scholars to promote those dancers. And so I feel like there's a more awareness in a way than there is in the kind of diaspora land where we're like, oh, we just don't see caste, which, you know, in reality, I think that does a disservice. I mean, we have a complicated history of all of the dance forms, all of them, whatever dance form you're participating in. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that complicated history if we want to be responsible dancers. And we are all in some way benefiting from some level of privilege. And so, like Patrun Garu said, which is you don't want to take up space for those other dancers who could be dancing. But then it's also if we're committed to practicing and continuing this art form, and we're thinking about the ways in which we tell those histories and foreground them. And so that's something I try to do with my classes all the time. And so I would imagine that that's, and I find that that's much more vocal, I think, in the Indian context.
So Yeah, my take on that question, especially from the from somebody who's within India and who's been working within cities of Hyderabad and you know all across the country. So initially, I when I started performing dance, the conversation of caste was never there. Like I was never into that particular conversation. I was just an outsider going ahead and listening to it on a higher level, but never had a way of being dived in deep into the conversation. But it all went on at a certain level that I was performing in a queer event which was organized, and somebody just came ahead and pointed out, this is more space which need to be given to the other people who are there in the community, and you have been performing for a while, and we want somebody from the minorities to come ahead and present it. And that was when I found, okay, there is something which is different, or there's something which I need to be aware. And since then, I had this analysis of learning. I'm an avid reader. I love reading a lot of content which is there in the web space. And I'm also a stalker. So if I like some kind of information, I stalk people in Facebook and all the other social media and try to understand or question them and put a lot of questions into it. So that's how my idea of sharing knowledge starts. So I had read about the cultures, as well as how exactly it's happening. What are the differences, or what are the kind of I would say issues which we are unaware of. And I still remember this, like last year, we had this Natikala conference which was happening in Chennai. And there was this entire panel where, there were eminent people coming here and talking about caste, gender, as well as, how exactly it plays a role in Indian classical dancing. And I still remember, that was a kind of conversation which elevated my idea of the politics of art, and how exactly it transforms, or how exactly it's there rooted into the very own space of performance. And I think that was something which helped me in challenging or creating works, focusing on the roots of the causes, and understanding what are the topics which I can pick, which is there within my space of picking up or talking, which I associate with, and what are the topics which I shouldn't majorly, because I am not a part of it, or I haven't experienced it myself. So yeah, I think that is something which helped me a lot. However, in Indian society, we don't have conversations, and I think that's major situation where we need to start having that conversations, and call out people and talk with them. I think that's something which really helps.
Yeah, I definitely agree with especially the having conversation. And I think something that you expressed, Professor Kamat, is that often we especially like me growing up, a lot of people like to say that there are no politics in art, especially in classical dance, especially as someone who's grown up in the United States and learning here that, it is just an art form kind of outside of social problems, outside of politics, outside of any sort of structures like that. But, as both of you expressed, it's not like that. As an art form, it is inherently tied to sort of that appropriation, tied to those structures that have in the past both marginalized communities and limited, maybe who has even had access to certain art forms. So the next question that we have is, in terms of the actual conception of classical Indian dance and kind of how it really was a sort of appropriation of already existing art form, can you ever get away from those structures? And if you try to produce art outside of those structures, is that even a positive thing? Are you completely moving away from what classical Indian dance is and kind of what it was conceptualized to be? And you can chime in, Swati, if you have input on that aspect.
So I was actually going off of the last question,
Mhm.
you know, just to talk about, like they were saying, the history of all the classical dances for Bharatanatyam. You know, it's interesting to see that it started off with the Devadasi system, and then also noting that, you know, it started off with the source being mainly from male gurus and Nattuvanars, and now transitioning to, you know, now where we have so many different kinds of people able to learn this art form and pass it on to the other generations. um, and I think being able to portray topics of any kind and experimenting, kind of going off of that, is very important because, like you were saying, you know, I think in the Indian community, educating each other is very important, and having those uncomfortable conversations, especially in this climate. And the fact that there are people willing to do that through dance and portray those topics is really important. And I'm glad to see so many people trying to do those things now.
I think again, sorry, Patruni Guard, do you have?
Yeah. Yeah, you can just call me Patruni. The Garo title is really, heavy on me to carry. Yeah, so
My fault. I'm used to Garu for everybody.
yeah, so it sometimes makes me feel I'm really old, which is not. Yeah, so coming back to the question of presenting art, this is my understanding, or this is my journey has been that I learned multiple art forms, and I got this wonderful advice from one of the really celebrated artists that that your body is a canvas, and you are actually going ahead and experiencing the art by learning it, and whatever comes into that particular canvas is something which you create your own language. So having said that, my initial journey was majorly with Bharatanatyam. My vocabulary was Bharatanatyam. I have been learning and trying to get that phonetics into my body. However, as and when I thought of deepening my performance level of talking diverse subject, there are people who do multiple social related performances within the framework of Bharatanatyam. But for me, I thought like, it's better to just step in a bit back and trying to understand how exactly it looks and what is fit within the framework and what is something which I couldn't do better within the framework. So that's when I leaped into the idea of learning about the art movements which happen within the world, and I found out something like the art forms like Buto, which is a part of the Japanese art, performative art. So I learned Buto, and I got the phonetics of how exactly it talks about a lot of different issues, and how major things like sexuality and understanding of body dynamics, partial or complete nudity, as well as the retrospective of the politics of body. So those were some of the ideas which I have developed with the idea of Buto, and that's what I wanted to bring in to my basics, which I have learned. So I presented, or I call my form of art as rather expressionism, and I don't term it as Bharatanatyam, majorly because I think that it's something which is different from what the framework has asked us to do. The structure of Bharatanatyam is. None of my performances are Marvan traditions. None of my performances are just limited to any of the items which are being taught within the structures. But majorly, I take a kind of a way to talk about my situation with a different language. And so that's one of the things which I start presenting. So initially starting with just dance pieces, like there are certain pieces which I created, like, there were 3 series of pieces. One was out of the box. There was something like in the box. These are pieces which I worked on, like box of gender expression, out of the box, and in the box. So majorly talking about what are the 3 genders which we have within our body, and how exactly we are presenting it, like what is within and what is out. So, and then pi was one of them, like pansexual, asexual, and intersexual. So picking up these words and trying to present it or trying to tell a story without even using a word. It's just like music which is running on the background. You tell the story of what exactly, what is pansexuality, intersexuality, as well as sexuality with a form of dance. So this were the initial traits of performance, and then it went on deep into performative aspect. I did something called as Fourplay, which is FOURPLAY, which talks about the legalization of same-sex marriage within India. And Certificate was one of the performance which I worked, which majorly talks about the regressive trans bill which was being implemented in 2017. Similarly, I worked on some kind of a format which were majorly into the performative aspect or performance art aspects. Like I did one thing called a striptease, which talks about the Me Too movement, especially within the male diaspora, especially related to the men and men from the queer community. So this structure, I'm still figuring it out, whether it's correct or whether it's not. But I think this helps me out in voicing out my idea of art, or putting out my word. And I think that gives me a kind of a courage of presenting it. So yeah, I think it's a journey for everybody. We pick it up and we see one particular thing in the multiple ways or multiple dimensional ways. And it's also something which they have learned within, how they, within from where they are coming from. And I think that's something which helps us to understand the aspect of art. And that's again something which we think of and present it as an art.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's very interesting kind of how there are, like you said, a lot of different ways to kind of understand not only movement, but to also express in different ways that might not be considered maybe legitimate or valid within the framework of a specific art form. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Thanvi. We have some more questions about how it is possible to express kind of different topics or different forms of content within classical Indian dance, but also maybe to work from that as a foundation and to express differently. But
yeah, so Petruni, you talked about your experience in expressing your experience through what you termed as expressionism, and you briefly described it. Could you maybe describe it a little bit more as far as what kind of factors led you to creating expressionism as you have manifested it now, and like what led you to that?
Yeah, so my major, as I said, my initial framework started because when I was presenting my art as Bharatnatyam, I was always, there was a circle around me which was guiding me through. This is again, coming from my own perspective. I know a lot of wonderful dancers and, who have been doing a lot of social aspected performances, within that particular framework. But for me, that framework, I think my knowledge was not enough to do that particular aspect within that circle which was there around me. And in order to step out of it, that's when I thought, I need a different kind of a framework to present. So expressionism comes from the World War II, where where expressionist movement started, and majority of the aspects were something which was quite aligned to surrealism and absurdism. And German expressionism is again a term term of art which started where it's started talking about the regressive and the situations which are there in the real life. Like it started as a part when Japan was being bombarded by Germany, and how people over there were affected by different things, like oil spills were happening, the nuclear reactions which were happening, and the artists were in a question that shall I go and tell the happy story or a romanticized story, or shall I tell the stories which are real in front of me? So that was the idea which developed into the expressionist art movement. And that's the same movement which was being again, transversed into Bhutto. So while I learned Bhutto, I thought like it's majorly, it's not something which is guided. We don't have like 16 to 17 set of adavis which we have to perform, but it's majorly something which is internal, where we bring in movement into the internal part of it and we present it. In Bharatanatyam as a context, we do not use external element within our performative spaces. Like we do use props, but we don't use it for everything. My majority of the work are relatable with something, an external element coming and putting into my own body, where I use masks quite often in my performances. And it also takes off the gap between the audience as well as the stage. Like I move out of the spaces of the stage, or I try to cross the line and go into the audience and ensure that it's provoking them. I will just give you a small example of how exactly my usual dance piece would look like. So this was one of the performances which I talked about, was Certificate, where I was presenting it to the audience. And this piece was about the trans bill which was implemented in 2017, and I was asked to present something on that particular topic. Though I could have went ahead and presented it like a proper dance, but I thought like it needs more. I need an action from the audience who are watching it, and that's when I went into the audience, and there was something. A co-fellow dancer was there with me. He's a drum. He was the one whom I have guided. So he would come onto the stage. I would be just standing on the stage, and he would be molesting me in front of the audience. Like the act was something like he's actually molesting me, and I was in a transgressive attire, trying to represent the body aesthetics of that particular way how exactly I was feeling. So each and every time this molestation was happening, I was asking question: is it what you want people to do with me? And each and every time this was happening, I was counting numbers. So by the end of the performance, I go ahead and ask, this is what you're asking. This is what the certificate of my gender, or this is what certifies my masculinity or femininity. And that question is left to the audience and just walk off the stage. So now the audience are in a state of mind that they have to answer the question, and they are the ones who have to take or make the change happen. So this is how the format of expressionism majorly looks like, which is again an interdisciplinary within dance, performance art, and yeah. So this is the framework which I thought of, which could have been done within the framework of Bharatanatyam if I have learned that much of aspect. But as my learning curve is just within the frame, I think it was evident for me to step out of that circle.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's interesting to hear how you drew from expressionist movements in different countries and their cultures, and kind of tie that into your experience. And I was struck when you said representing real stories. I thought that was also very important. And you just talked about your recent piece with the binary between femininity and masculinity. So I guess this could be open to all three panelists, but how do you think that this binary, if it is really a binary, or if it's can be displayed as a spectrum, how is this displayed through classical dance? And basically, how is classical dance, like with the concepts of gender, how is that generally displayed? And yeah, anyone could jump in.
Maybe you'd like to begin, Professor Kamat, because I know, especially your work with Kuchipudi is very specific to kind of sexuality and gender presentation.
I mean, I think that there is quite like if you imagine that dance allows one to enact a role that might be different from their own, right? So already all dance involves a level of impersonation. This is a quote RuPaul, we're all doing drag essentially. So one can read it as this kind of really gender fluid possibility. And I think Patruni's various choreographies really demonstrate a kind of challenge and real interesting experimentation with that. For me, I was interested in thinking about the ways in which the donning of strivesham, which literally means a woman's guise, a vesham meaning guise, actually gets codified as being something more important. There's something more fantastical about that practice of the cis male body entering into a woman's guise than the reverse practice of Purusha Vesham or Moga Vesham in Telugu, which kind of gets coded as being sort of, oh, that's just mundane. Sure, so-and-so is enacting Krishna, like Krishna is already kind of gender bent anyway, it's not a big deal. So it's interesting that even in dance itself, art itself, which allows all of these layers of fluidity and impersonation, challenges the binaries, that in many ways through language and discourse and power and caste and other structures, that sometimes those binaries still retain their places. So unless we're doing something very overtly experimental like Patruni is doing, we oftentimes find ourselves in situations where the strivesham is given more importance, and it has been historically. So across dance and theater in India, the practice of male actors donning female roles was really highly lauded. So if you go into the Sangeet Natak Academy archives in Delhi, there are pictures all over the place of these impersonators, and they're all cis men who are enacting these female roles. And it was at this point of fascination. And so Bal Gandharva, Jay Shankar Sundari in Marathi and theater, for example. And then in the case of even Telugu theater, there's Thanam Narasimha Rao. And then in Kuchipudi circles, it's really, really what enables Kuchipudi to become the classical dance form of India. So I think that there's something to be said about that, that we should, we shouldn't just say, oh yes, everything is fluid in India and everything is rigid in the United States. There's more complexity there. But the other thing I wanted to add quickly, just in relation to this question about experimentation, and then I want to give Swati a chance because she's a choreographer and I'm not. So, one thing that I want to note is that when we talk about what's classical, we have to remind ourselves that that very terminology isn't of itself a 20th century construct. It harkens back to an idea of an imagined past that dates to Natyashastra, but the movement vocabularies that are grounding Bharatnatyam, Kuchipudi, many of these dance forms are really kind of constructed in the 20th century. And so those 20th century gurus were experimenting with what they were doing. And then that experimentation ultimately became tradition. And so now we say, oh, well, that's traditional. And you're like, well, what does that mean? So Kuchipudi in the village looks very different from what Venkateshwara Satyam, who's this very well-known guru who traveled outside of the village and moved to Chennai, started choreographing in films, and then really wanted to create the Kuchipudi version of the Kalakshetra, and so adopted a lot of Rukmini Arundale. This is a controversial statement, no Kuchipudi dancer is going to like me saying this, but adopted a lot of the movement vocabulary of Bharatanatyam into Kuchipudi. And then what happens is that then becomes tradition. He was highly experimental, even in content. So he choreographed Rabindranath Tagore's play Chandalika into a dance drama about a Dalit woman. I mean, really, really, really experimental in terms of his movement repertoire, his choreography, etc. And now he's the ultimate paragon of tradition, as if it's so rigid and he never experimented, when he himself was very much challenging these dance forms. So I think we have to sort of, when we think about, well, does this then no longer become Bharatanatyam, or does this no longer become Kuchipudi if I do these experimentations, to remind ourselves that the very construction historically was already grounded in experimentation. So there is no such thing as this idealized traditional form. It in of itself historically was always experimenting. So I would encourage, forms of experimentation through new choreographies, because I think that's the very history of the dance form if we look at it very carefully. Okay, I'll stop there. I want to hear from Swati about her experimentations.
Sure, thank you. So I don't know if I would call myself a choreographer or anything, but I've had some experiences trying out and experimenting with some choreography and being able to collaborate with other artists. So some of the pieces we've worked on, aside from the piece that I mentioned before, was called Still I Rise, which is based off of a Maya Angelou poem. And that was one of the first pieces we did on a social topic, which revolved around women empowerment. So that was kind of our, taking our first stab at it, which is really nice to kind of get feedback and response from people. And another one we got to do was A Salute to Soldiers, which was kind of a very, also a very different topic from our usual stories about gods and goddesses shown in Bharatnatyam that we're taught from a young age, going with the traditional structure, like you said, of Bharatnatyam. So that kind of portrayed two men on opposite sides of a war and their experiences. And these are stories, again, and I'll go into the next piece as well, but these are stories where we did research online and, reading about other people's stories and kind of creating our own storyline and thought process to go along with the dancing, right? And Revelations was the piece that I mentioned before, where a daughter is coming out to her mother. And so for that, obviously, we wanted to do full justice and do as much research as possible to really stay true to those emotions because it's such an important topic. So for that, again, researching and creating a storyline that was unique but still true to those emotions, and kind of having that base emotion of mother-daughter bond was really important. And one thing, that we've struggled with, because again, like in Indian Raga, all of us, we've never really met each other, so it's all done virtually. So, it does take a lot longer, I would say, to kind of come up with those storylines and choreograph virtually, not even really knowing each other, and trying to stay as true as we can to those topics and our dancing. And I was going to say, like, one other thing that's helped me is being able to take from other styles as well. So I initially started off doing ballet, tap, jazz when I was very young, and then got into Bharatanatyam. And I think that had helped me a lot with my flexibility. And then going into being a part of a collegiate dance team, I was exposed to like Bollywood, hip hop, contemporary, Bhangra, all these different styles. And I think movement wise, Bharatanatyam is, traditionally, at least in my style, Bandanalur, it's very stiff, and it's very based on lines, also with grace at times. But I think being able to learn other styles and finding different ways your body can move is really useful when incorporating it into a classical style. For example, like using karnas, right? So I took a workshop on that, which was very interesting because traditionally you're not really taught those things, right? You're taught the basic adavus and then going off from there. So it's nice to be able to learn from other gurus, other people, to learn how they've experimented with the style. Because as you just mentioned, right, I think you can't really have a definition for classical dance because it's evolving through time. So there's no, I guess, strict right or wrong, but it's just about continuing to evolve and experiment and expressing yourself through it.
Thank you. Thank you all for all of your perspectives. I guess to just continue the conversation about experimentation and innovation in classical dance, I'm going to turn it over to Animesha with some more questions.
Hi, going off of what Swati just talked about a little bit just now, there's a religious and cultural element and a certain level of respect that is given to the Indian classical arts, and they require years of training and wise, dedicated tutelage. And how is this reconciled with trying to expand the art in the age of the internet, where anyone can be a creator? And then more directed towards Swati and Indian Raga, like what is the role of Indian Raga in addressing this liberal conservative dynamic?
So a little bit about that. I think, their motto is kind of, I think Indian Raga's motto is basically keeping classical cool. So, staying very true to the classical art form. And, you know, anyone who's selected as a fellow to, if it's in classical dance or music, you know, they must have been trained for a certain number of years, like you said, and there are trained professionals who evaluate them in order for them to get in. So, you know, like you said, there definitely are many creators out there, but in this platform, at least, what I've seen are, or people who I've collaborated with have had experience in the arts and are very knowledgeable about that. So when we get to get together and collaborate, I think that's when you're able to kind of try to stay true to that foundation and to the respect of the art form, but try to experiment with it as much as you can. And like you said, I think there is a very fine line between, you know, tradition and experimenting. And I've seen so many videos on both sides of the spectrum. And I know, you know, there's definitely some hate going on in both sides, you know, people that maybe may experiment way too much, or people who are very strict and rigid in their mindset of keeping it completely traditional, right? But again, I think that's all very subjective to anyone, and it's all based on your own opinions of dance, right? So I don't think there's any strong definition of what is classical and what's not. But I think, like you said, it is really important that you do stay true to the foundations and have that experience and those amount of years in that art form in order to create in it.
Does anyone else want to add to that at all? So moving off of that, with the whole fusion thing that's become popular recently in terms of fusion music and fusion dance, I know you did say that there's really no like strict definition, but between the three of you, like how would you define classical dance fusion? And does creating fusion pieces add or detract from the value of classical dance? And what could the social purpose be of creating such pieces?
Yeah, so I majorly think that, you know, we, any irrespective of whatever the dance form or you know, any kind of an art form which we are doing, we always need to ask like three questions to ourselves, like, you know, who, for whom we are doing, for what we are doing, for why we are doing it. And you know, addressing these three questions initially would always help us in making sure that, you know, we deliver something which you know, which is quite unique in its own nature, and which also transcends it to the audience. You know, the entire perspective of fusion has started with a really wonderful way where, you know, intermixing of, you know, multiple forms, like, you know, multiple people came together. There was a lot of a collaboration which happened, conversation which happened with an artist, and everything was going fine until and unless this way of, you know, the internet's spring which started all of a sudden, like, you know, and majorly people who are not from the dance industry at all, or somebody who are, you know, way too ahead from the entertainment industry, like, you know, somebody who's running a high level you know, shows of dance on TVs, whereas without any representation of any classical dance forms within their own framework for a really long time, they come back and they use a bit of any kind of a classical dance or anything which does not fit into the idea of, you know, why, when, and how we are doing it, and present it to the audience, you know, which also places the art form into a different context, and also ensures that, you know, also leaves the audience confused. So that's something which need to be avoided. But we cannot define what exactly is a good fusion, what exactly is a bad fusion. It's just like if the audience are enjoying it, or if the audience are getting with the concept of why, you know, how and when, I think that that's doing the purpose. The art is doing the purpose. But if it's not, then definitely there should be a better way of presenting that.
Swati or Dr. Kamat, do you want to talk about your perception of classical fusion?
I can talk about it a little bit. So, just going off of what you said, I think he covered it mostly, because it's really important to understand the purpose of why you're doing any piece or performance and who you're doing it for. And again, like I was saying, I don't think there's any strict definition unless it is kind of, just put in there just for the sake, then, then it doesn't really have that purpose, right? But as far as fusion goes, I think if you're fusing two styles, definitely try to stay as true as you can to both of those styles. That's really important. And yeah, I think as long as it makes yourself happy as a dancer, that's why I think like arts are so subjective, right? As long as it makes you happy and you're able to express that, and the people watching you enjoy it, like that's kind of all that matters, right? So.
So then with so much constant experimentation, even in, as Professor Kamat said, with the historical construction of what classical, like the word means, when is it time to stop calling something classical dance? Like when does it become disrespectful to call something classical?
Maybe I can jump in there and just say it's a question I was thinking about when the two of you were talking, which is when, like, who gets, and going back to the questions you emailed also, who gets to make that decision, right? Who are the people that get to designate something as quote unquote classical and something as fusion or Bollywood or whatever, right? The filmy dance, or however we want to use various designations as pejoratively to define something and positively for something else. And I think that, the question goes back to the idea that the very notion of classical is in of itself a constructed category. I can give you a really specifically historical context. When the Indian nation state gained its independence in 1947, within a few years, almost like a decade afterwards, the Sangeet Nati Academy, which is this arts organization that you all are probably familiar with, was created, and there were local branches that were also created in various states. And so their job at some point in time was to designate, well, what are the classical forms from XYZ region in XYZ part of India? And so there was a point of contestation with Kuchipudi in particular, because Rukmini Devi Arundel said, oh, well, Kuchipudi is not classical. And so it's interesting, it was an off-the-cuff remark, but it set the spark in the Kuchipudi community to say, of course, we're classical, right? So then the following year, after this seminar in Delhi that was held, the following year, in the mid-20th century, the following year, a seminar in AP State was held to proclaim Kuchipudi as classical. And so you can just see that the very constructed nature of that very terminology, of how it gets applied and who gets to apply it, right? So Rukmini Devi Arundel says something that it means something serious. And then the ways in which it gets countered is by having upper caste Brahmin dance form assert its own classicism. So we always have to think about, right, who are the people in power to make that call? And then what does it need to hold on to some idea of the classical? I know I was thinking about and maybe again, to go back to Swati's point about it being very subjective. I'm trained by a student of Vempati Chinasatyam, Sasikala Panamarthi. And so I know Chinasatyam or Master Garu's style really well. And for me, the movement vocabulary for that is very much what I feel is classical. So as a dancer, my body knows like what this feels like to do something in a particular way. But as a historian of dance, I absolutely know that, yes, Chinasatyam was experimenting in 1950 when he moved from this village. He was choreographing for films. He was doing all sorts of really interesting things, and that his actual choreography changed over the course of the decades that he was running his institution, and that he actually changed his choreography based off of the dancers he was choreographing for. So when I dance now an item, like I did last week, that was performed by Balakondola Rao, who's one of his senior students, it's a really hard footwork intensive item. And so that to me, like, in some ways my body knows what is classical, but I already, as a historian of dance, already recognize that as being very subjectively constructed, right? My own training has shaped that aesthetics and gives me a avenue to say, well, this is good dance and this is not good dance. But as a scholar, I'm going to take a step back and say, well, why am I making that discernment, right? Who has trained me? Who has told me how to envision dance in a certain way? So I think our job, right, as dancers who are deeply invested in retaining some commitment to dance, is to just take that step back, right, to say, okay, I really know this in my body in these various ways. But now if I step back, I can think about the historical constructs, I think about the various power plays, I think about the gendered or sexual or caste-based like restrictions that are placed in these dance forms. And how does that give me a different lens? So I think in a way, it's kind of like, especially in this day and age, for us to be socially minded and socially conscious dancers when we dance. And so then I think that this line of dividing classical versus fusion or contemporary, when does it stop becoming Bharatanatyam? When does it stop becoming Kuchipudi? That question at the end of the day ultimately doesn't matter because it is very much subjective. So I think I'll end there.
Just to add on to the point which Dr. Kamat said, it's really wonderfully put in, and I think as and when we put the word classical, we are already creating a boundary for ourselves. And majorly the reason why these classical dance forms existed because they wanted to have their own pool of people or artists presenting. I still remember this context majorly, like why there are more than 200 million Bharatanatyam dancers all over India, whereas there are only 5 or 6 or a limited number of dances for other forms like Vilasini Natyam or folk dances like Chow is one of them. So I think the structure of classical classical status has made a kind of reverberation to ensure that okay, this is something which is trusted. It's just like a corporate company going ahead and selling a package of thing that this is something which is trusted with the trusted logo and presenting it to the audience. However, again, the definition of classical, which is classical and which is not classical, is at every level, irrespective. When we check about the ballet, ballet is considered classical, and then anything which came after was considered as a contemporary. When it comes to drag, anything which is RuPaul is doing is called as classical drag, and anything which any of us are doing something which is different from that, it's something which is called as either postmodern or something which is out of the scope of the rule set of drag. So I think whenever we create this kind of words or boundaries for any kind of art form, we just limit the way of its expansion. And I think that's what we need to question and understand and see what is relevant and what is not.
Is there anything else anyone would like to add to this? All right, thank you guys so much for answering these questions for us. Sanina?
Yeah, I think that was a really nice place to kind of close. Just, I think it's important as an artist in any form to kind of question what it is that you have learned and to question even what it is that you're performing or expressing and how you're choosing to do that, and kind of the constructs, the terminology, the sort of language games that you're operating either within or actively and intentionally subverting as an artist. So maybe we could go around, and if you could maybe express kind of a single sentiment or takeaway from this conversation, or maybe a general motto as an artist, kind of how you're motivated to continue expressing and performing, just anything like a single sentence, or if you just want to maybe start with Swati and go around.
Yeah, sure. So I think out of this discussion, it's just been interesting to kind of talk about the limitations in classical dance and to see that, there's no set person or set sort of rules that kind of say, this is what makes classical dance what it is. And as we were talking, I started, thinking about my own pieces and thinking of how like for example, Revelations, we chose it to be just an instrumental piece because we wanted there to be no language barrier. So also trying to reach different audiences, right? So yeah, I think it's just been really nice to listen to the other panelists, and thank you for these amazing questions and having us here today.
And if maybe Katrina wanted to maybe like a single sentence, just what you will remember from this conversation, or just in general as an artist.
Yeah, so I really loved being at this particular space, virtually connecting with all of who are there in this particular panel, and which would not have happened if you have created this initiative. This conversation is something which is really helpful for learning and understanding the perspective. And I think the takeaways for me is like one of the interesting parts is Kuchipudi, and I got to learn a lot of history about Kuchipudi, and that's something which I would be learning and also reading the book so that it would help me understand and try to deep dive in. And Swatiji, I've been following you for a really long time, and I really love the work which you have been doing with Indian Raga and a lot of videos. So I've been stalking Indian Raga for a while as well. So I think that's something which takes me back, and this is something which I think like art can never be defined, and art is something which is quite personal, and everyone is valid in their own space and time. Thank you.
And thank you both for Swati and Patruni. I'm so excited to hear about both of your various forms of experimentation. I'm sure you'll show up in my classes now in various video clips for my students. And I'm always looking for ways in which I think that dancers are really breaking molds and thinking about alternative forms, topics, choreography styles, etc. So it's exciting to hear about both of your work. And just to reiterate, I mean, I think that one thing that that I want to just put out there is that, all of us who are dancers, I mean, I constantly struggle, like, why do I dance? Given all that I know about these dance forms and these histories, should I keep dancing? And so I think that part of our responsibility as dancers is perhaps to keep dancing, especially if that is what we love, but to always be asking those questions, right? To say, like, this, it feels uncomfortable to me, or I want to know more about X. And so I don't mean to deflate anyone in terms of your passion for dance. Please keep dancing, but also think about asking those hard questions. And I tell my students, like, if you're uncomfortable, then I've done a good job. So so sit in that discomfort, because that's where that space of growth comes from. And if you, I mean, I'm sure that all three of us would probably say this, but if anybody has questions, you can Google me quickly and find my email address, and please email me. I'm happy to send you articles or any other links or resources. But thank you again for all these wonderful questions as well, and to the panelists.
Oh, that was very powerful, and I think I'd like to again thank all three of you, Professor Kamat, Swati, and Patruni, for being willing to engage in this discussion in this live stream virtual format, because for me at least, it has been a very informational discussion, and I am very excited to always hear from anyone who is an artist, who is a scholar in this space, because everyone has different backgrounds and different perspectives, and there's always so much to bring into different conversations. But on behalf of Samasana, I would also like to say thank you. It was really good with me, Rohan, and Animisha being able to talk to the three of you. And unless Animisha, Thami, or Rohan have anything else to say, I think we will close out for the evening.
I don't have much more to add other than thank you all for speaking with us today. I definitely learned a lot, and I'm excited to continue learning.
Then to anyone who has been watching, thank you for tuning in. Samasana is planning to do events in the future like this. So if you have any interest in being involved as either a panelist or as a moderator, please reach out to us. You can message us directly on Facebook or Instagram, email us, or also if you know us personally, feel free to just reach out personally. So we're always open to new ideas and having other people involved. So thank you to everyone who tuned in tonight. And with that, goodbye to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.